Sit down and stop telling lies. Those were the words asserted by my first grade teacher when I told the class that President Thomas Jefferson is my great, 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 great grandfather. We were studying US presidents, so I was excited to share the information that I had been hearing in my family my whole life. At 7 years old, I didn't understand the complexity of what I was saying or why someone wouldn't believe it. This was not fake news. It was my family's legacy, the oral history that had been passed down to my brother Sean and me as a matter of fact. Luckily, my mother Priscilla, whose family line on her father's side makes the Jefferson link, went to my school the next day and told the teacher who had berated me, quote, "My son is a 9th generation descendant of Thomas Jefferson and his slave Sally Hemings, and don't tell him differently." From that day on, I think I realized that not everyone would believe the story of my heritage. Not even some of my close friends would believe me at first. Their responses were usually, "Yeah, right, and I'm related to Abraham Lincoln." After so much criticism and disbelief about my connection to Jefferson, I stopped telling people about it. I knew who I was and didn't need to prove it to anyone. As my mom always said, be strong in the belief of who you are and don't let other people define you. I still practice that lesson to this day. Fast forward 31 years, and I'm now co-author with photojournalist Jane Feldman of the book Jefferson's Children, the story of one American family. The Jefferson-Hemings relationship has been validated by researchers like Annette Gordon-Reed with the help of DNA samples, and it has been accepted as fact by countless sources, including the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, which runs Jefferson's home and museum, Monticello. The family was even featured on the Oprah Winfrey Show, the Today Show, CBS Sunday Morning, and the list goes on. There is still a faction, however, that claims that a relative of Jefferson was the one to father some of Sally Hemings' children. I'm pretty sure that today, my first grade teacher would not challenge me. Although my family story is more widely accepted now than ever before, wrapping our minds around all of the complexities in this family, as well as in other families touched by slavery, can be challenging. This is one reason that Jefferson Hemings family members came together to help start the organization Coming to the Table. When my cousin, Shay Banks Young, who we call Mama Shay, told me that the descendants of slaves and the descendants of slave owners were coming together at the table of brotherhood to break bread and to discuss in depth our country's complicated past and its connections to our personal families, I knew I had to be involved. However, I had no idea what to expect. I'm not even sure if the organization had a mission statement at that point, or if they just knew they had a novel idea. Either way, the concept was enough to catch my attention. It sounded like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream was being realized, and I wanted a seat at the table. At that first Coming to the Table gathering at Eastern Mennonite University in Virginia, a small and diverse group talked about the pain, anger, and guilt, along with the barrage of other feelings that were surfacing upon our discovery that we were descendants of slaves or slave masters. In some cases, like mine, and that of a few of my cousins, we had to deal with the thought of being a descendant of both slave and slave master. For some, it was the first time they had heard others talk about how they were dealing with the news and what it meant for them. While this may not have been the first time the Black people in the room had talked about their views on slavery and its effects on our families, it may have been the first time they shared these thoughts and feelings with white people. It also seemed to be the first time many of the white people faced confronting and sharing their feelings about the issue. I remember thinking that the whole exchange was very brave. It was a vulnerable situation, and it was refreshing to see people willing to have in-depth conversations about a topic that most would never touch, but that we all knew needed to be talked about. It was a truly enlightening experience. I often say that in order to let go of the anger, pain, and resentment we feel about slavery, we have to talk about it and go through the healing process. and coming to the table allowed that outlet. One experience especially sticks out in my mind. In one of our sessions with the entire group, my cousin Mama Shay said she wanted to tell everyone a story. She wanted everyone to have a better picture of what African people went through when they took that 2 to 3 month journey to a new land to be broken into slaves. Close your eyes and clear your mind, she said. Then she proceeded to narrate the highlights of that slave voyage to the new land. She led us through the kidnapping, the deplorable living conditions, the murder, rape, physical abuse, and dehumanization. When she finished, there was not a dry eye left in the house. It was an experience many had never even thought about, let alone been transported to. Not only was Mama Shay's slave journey powerful and impactful, but it was also a learning experience. While some appreciated that glimpse into the reality of slavery, others were upset that she had caught them off guard and had subjected them to such a horrible and graphic experience without a warning or disclaimer. Mama Shay used these insights to open up a discussion about how slaves also never got a warning or disclaimer after being ripped from their families and having their lives disrupted and violated. That discussion is a perfect example of what's great about the Coming to the Table organization. It forces us out of our comfort zones, but doesn't leave us faltering in unknown territory. For it is outside our comfort zones where the real work begins, work that can lead to deeper understanding, healing, and in many cases, reconciliation. After all, the only way we are going to grow and someday be a unified nation is to start talking about our painful past. The Coming to the Table organization and conference is one of those deep and life-changing experiences that you may have to go through to truly understand. But once you do, you will not be sorry, and you certainly won't be the same. Thank you. And now I'll give you to Jill to read an excerpt from the second chapter.
Sorry, I was muted. I wanted to let you know that Catherine is also here. She wanted us to know she's here. Yeah. So it's nice. I think we have 5 contributors because I saw Dave Boumet. So this is really nice. Thank you everybody for coming. Okay, so Anne, I don't know. Hold your ears. I will do my best to honor your chapter.
Jill, it's all good with me.
Oh, there you are.
No
Thank you. I'm glad though people get to see you. Okay, so my voice, that person for the moment. Okay, So Many Names by A.B. Westring. In the fall of 2015, while researching Richmond, Virginia, as the setting for a novel, I came across a book by Benjamin Campbell titled Richmond's Unhealed History. I was devouring the text, underlining and highlighting passages, totally absorbed in Campbell's presentation when I hit a section about Virginia's House of Burgess, and stopped cold. I say that I hit a section, but the effect was more like the section hit me. Here before me was colonial history I hadn't learned. How could I have missed it? How could American textbooks have left it out? I'm descended from a number of men who served in Virginia's House of Burgess, says. Aunt Margaret had played the role of family historian and instilled in all of us, cousins, aunts, uncles, anyone who'd listen, a tremendous sense of pride in our family tree. Textbooks described our ancestors with words like courageous for having fought off Indians, in quotes, and bold for having established a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Our ancestors forged a nation that would become great by virtue of its principles, such as all are created equal. They were strong leaders and articulate speakers, greatly respected and admired. But in Richmond's Unhealed History, the author doesn't gush with admiration about these men. Instead, he sheds light on some of the legislative accomplishments of the House of Burgess, especially on laws having to do with slavery. These were laws I hadn't heard about or if I had, I'd forgotten. They regularly hadn't been emphasized when I was in school. I blog regularly, and a few years before reading Richmond's Unhealed History, I happened to mention in a post that my ancestors had enslaved Africans. Aunt Margaret hadn't ever said as much, but I'd figured it out through deductive reasoning. If textbooks presented Thomas Jefferson as a reluctant participant in the institution of slavery, and if Jefferson was the first cousin of my direct ancestor, then mine had to have been an enslaver too. The blog post in reference was on a different topic. Slaveholding was an aside, but the line about slavery clearly hit a nerve. 3,000 miles away, a close relative read my post and shot me an email with the subject line, "Too much information," in quotes, and an exclamation point. He wrote that it was inexcusable for me to blog about the family, adding, "I do not think that our family history of owning slaves, if indeed true, as which is very new news to me, needs to be in the public domain." He thought I should become more appreciative of our relatives, and he asked me to take down the post. While he didn't use the word shame, I imagine he felt it. Or he felt embarrassed or wronged or something, I'm not sure what. But I realized that if I was going to put information like this out in the world, I would need proof. Deductive reasoning wasn't good enough, but proof would require research, and I was so busy. So I turned to Wikipedia. Yay. I pulled two names from our family tree, William Randolph, 1650 to 1711, and Richard Bland, 1710 to 1776. And in less than a minute, I had at least some measure of proof. That is, both men's wiki pages mentioned their ownership of slaves. Seeing the confirmation in print was simultaneously affirming. It meant my blog post was true, and unsettling. It meant my family's denial ran deep. No one in my family had ever talked about this fact. I sent my too much information relative a polite thank you, saying I'd continue to think about what he'd written. And I've certainly kept that promise, but I've never fulfilled his request to take down the post. Details related to our ancestors had been hidden from us, and I wanted to learn more. I began digging deeply into Southern history and learning about white privilege. Growing up, I had no awareness of my privilege. I simply hadn't thought about it, which I now understand is in itself an element of privilege. That I can walk through the world not thinking about issues related to race. My book group chose to read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow and Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns, exposing me to ideas and perspectives already known in African American circles, but quite new to me. I found the books compelling and the discussions lively, but for the most part, the issues raised by these authors seem to have more to do with society in general than with me in particular. Or perhaps I should put it this way. For years, I kept racial issues framed in a political context, not a personal one. But in the fall of 2015, when I read Richmond's Unhealed History, I could no longer hold racial issues at arm's length. The political was becoming personal. On page 79, Campbell wrote, "By its slave system, Virginia codified institutionalized and regulated poverty. Virginia's leaders racialized slavery." That line was the one that made me look up from the page. My ancestors were Virginia's leaders. My ancestors racialized slavery. My ancestors voted on how the institution of slavery would function, justifying the enslavement of Africans with the claim that people of color were inferior to Europeans. My ancestors established a hierarchy of human value based solely on race. My ancestors were responsible for America's peculiarly horrific institution of slavery. The system was their design, their plan, their legacy, and in support of their declarations, they quoted the Bible. Richmond's Unhealed History rattled me to the core. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Jane. So we'll turn it back over to you now.
So I would love it if you said there are 5 contributors. Could each of you just introduce yourself to us and tell us a little bit about how you came to be involved in this and your story?
Should we, like, otherwise we're going to have this cacophony of voices?
Yes, that's great. So why don't you introduce,
Okay.
introduce them?
Oh, I thought you were going to say, yes, that's great, a
Or if
cacophony.
you want, I don't care, whichever one, yeah.
Okay, and you happen to be right next to me on my screen. So, and I just read your story, so.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Jill and Dionne, for doing this thing tonight. And in the weirdness of this quarantine that we're in, the fact that I'm able to participate, that you guys from Montclair are online is just fabulous. So thank you so much. So actually when Jill read, and thank you, Jill, that was a wonderful reading. You kind of heard how I came into coming to the table. You heard my background a little bit. I want to add something that for me was really powerful in this book. So when my copy of the book came, my chapter is titled So Many Names. And as I went on through my essay and my research, I ended up going to the Library of Virginia archives and finding and documenting names of enslaved people from last wills and testaments. And there were so many. There were well over 100 just in 2 days of research. I mean, boom, boom, boom. They were just all there. And I said, I just need to mention all these names. And I put them in an addendum to my essay. Just name all these enslaved people. Then my copy, I don't know, this was like 2 years later. There was a long editing process before the book came out. So my copy arrived and I'm reading it, and I got to the index in the back of the book. And I started to cry because Dionne and Jill had put in the index in this book the name of every enslaved person that I had mentioned. So these were people that history had forgotten, but I had found them in archives, so I had named them, and there were their names like right next to names like Thomas Jefferson. You know, it was giving these people dignity in a way, and I didn't know Dionne and Jill were going to do that in the book, and I started to cry. So there's just so much healing that is part of what coming to the table is all about. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting us know. I don't know that we knew either, and this was an organic process, but very glad to know that. Very glad to know that. We should let Rutgers know. Yeah, we should let our editor know. Yeah.
I also see.
Yeah, Phoebe's here too.
Yes, I see Phoebe. Phoebe, do you want to say something?
Hi, Phoebe.
Hi everybody. My cousin Betty and I wrote the last chapter in the book, and she's an African American and is a descendant of people that my family enslaved. And the way we were connected is I sort of start where Shannon Lanier's story ended. He talked about, you know, a group getting together at Eastern Mennonite University in 2006. That was like January. And I came to work at the university in August of that year. And I heard about this event that had happened, coming to the table, and I went to one of the founders who worked there also, Will Hairston, and asked him about it. And I was just intrigued. I'd never even thought about my family enslaving people because my father had never talked about it, but I knew he was a Virginian, and I knew his racial attitudes were pretty awful, and it was likely. So I started to do research, and it was very easy to figure it out. And so I went back to Will Harrison, and I was telling him, oh, I'm pretty sure I'm connected to this woman, Betty Kilby Fisher, because, you know, I found her online, and I looked at a book she'd written in it, and her father came from the same area of Virginia as mine, and but I don't really know for sure. And so he says to me, well, Phoebe, you're never going to figure this out unless you talk to her, and next week is Martin Luther King Day. That'd be a good day to contact her. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I just figured this out. And you think so I sent an email, believe it or not, on Martin Luther King Day, 2007. And she was at a place where she could respond to me. And her email back to me, the title, the subject line was "Hello, Cousin." So it was wonderful. It was so touching. And we've been developing our relationship ever since. So you can read about the rest of it in the last chapter of the book.
That was a tease. And thank you. Thanks so much, Phoebe. It's a great, and that's such an important chapter. They're all important.
All important. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you so much.
Catherine's also here. I'm looking to see who else is here while Catherine Sassanoff.
Yay, Catherine. Can you say hello?
Catherine may be muted. Let's see.
Okay.
Catherine, can you unmute yourself? I don't see her on the list.
Oh, okay.
What name is she going by?
I just saw her name. So
She might be under Paul.
oh yes, Paul Miller.
Yeah.
So yes, so I don't know if I can unmute her. Maybe she stepped away. Okay.
Okay, she's unmuted now.
But I think may have stepped away,
That's possible.
or something's up with the Wi-Fi.
All right. Also, I thought I saw Dave Boumet with.
So did I, but I'm not seeing him now. That's what I'm kind of flipping around. Okay, so maybe we should. Hopefully, they'll be able to come back.
There he is. There's
David's here.
Hi, Dave.
Hi.
Oh, good.
Hi, everybody. My ancestors owned over 100 slaves at Oakland Plantation in what is now Alexandria, Virginia, between 1741 and 1861, 4 generations. Both of my great-great-grandfathers died for the Confederacy. And the racism that marked our family came down to me through my mother, unimpeded from those days of antebellum glory, which she considered the great highlight of our family history. I was listening to an interview with Katrina Brown on Democracy Now! About 2011, 2012, and saw Katrina Brown's film, Traces of the Trade, and found out about Coming to the Table. I've been to a couple of national gatherings with my wife, and it's been one of the great experiences of my life to be invited to participate in Slavery's Descendants with a chapter that tells the story of my ancestors, which of course my family wants very much not to be told. That's my story. Coming to the Table has been a tremendous coming forth for me, and I so much appreciate working with Dionne and Jill. They're both wonderful editors, and I very much cherish the experience.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dave.
So Jeremy Granger, there were several people who asked where you could get a copy of the book. This is what it looks like. It is available on Amazon if you're stuck in your house and can't get anywhere else. But it is also at Watch on Booksellers. If you are in Montclair and want to call them, I'm sure they can arrange something for you. And then Jeremy Granger says, if you want to get a copy of the book at 30% off with free shipping and a free ebook, visit https rutgersuniversitypress.org. It's in the chat box. I would just follow that link because there's a code you can enter and everything else. So yeah, so that's kind of a hot deal for tonight. I feel like I should be on an infomercial or something.
Well, it's great. That means that Rutgers is here and they heard what you said, Anne.
Yeah.
Jeremy works for Rutgers.
Jeremy's from Rutgers. Thank you.
Good, good. Well, that worked. Boy, I'm telling you, this virtual stuff is working out well tonight.
Oh, and thank you, Jeremy, for that link. That's great.
So I think if there's nobody else that's here who is a contributor that is talkable, why don't we open it up to other people for questions? If you have a question, feel free to ask it. Just unmute yourself. And as I said, you can do that if you're not familiar with the process. There's a little microphone in your bottom left-hand corner. Just click on that and you should be able to speak. So, and then if you forget to mute yourself again, just if your dog starts barking, please remember to mute yourself.
Oh, and I just wanted to say that Catherine has just wrote in the chat box that her partner's camera and mic are not working. So she's trying. Okay. She's trying to find another route.
Okay.
She found it. She found it. She's here.
Oh.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Catherine. How are you?
I have a quick question.
Oh, good.
A
Okay.
long answer, maybe. And I guess between Dionne and Jill, they can act as moderators and pass it. I don't know. But what about the question of reparations and coming to the table?
I'm not sure what your question is.
Well,
are you asking specifically about reparations or reparations and or coming to the table's position on reparations? Because for me, those are two different questions.
I'll leave it to you to respond. Just the issue.
It's not fair.
Twice, Jill.
It's not fair that you pin me down to particulars.
Well, no, you see, both Dionne and I have talked about reparations. We can talk about that, but if we're going to talk about reparations and coming to the table, I'm passing it to Phoebe. So.
Yeah, I just unmuted because, yes, we, in about 2014, we had several community conference calls, sort of like this, but it was before we used Zoom and we used just phone to talk about what reparations could look like. And we, from that came a reparations working group. And if you go to the Coming to the Table website, which is just www.comingtothetable.org, just all together, you can look under resources and you'll find the reparations working group. And we put together a reparations guide, which provides a lot of ideas on what reparations could look like at a personal level, at a community level, and societal level. And we're in the process of gathering the group, the working group is in the process of gathering stories of people who are working for reparations in some way. So also, I'd just like to point that the book, the last chapter that I wrote with my cousin Betty, there is an example of one kind of personal reparations. And that's where I and my family set up a scholarship endowment for the descendants of people our family had enslaved. And so Betty, right now, Betty's and her brothers and other grandkids are benefiting from that. In fact, I just talked to Betty today on the phone and told her her grandson and granddaughter were going to get a scholarship this year. So that's just one example of reparations. But if you want to look at Coming to the Table's website, you can find all about the position and ideas for reparations.
Thank you.
And Kevin, Dionne just posted in the chat box the link to that, so you can find it right there. I thought what I found interesting, and I don't remember whose chapter it was in, but the whole idea of reparations being a form of healing and how this too is a form of healing. So while it's not monetary reparations, it's still moving us towards that healing process, which I thought was an interesting perspective on it.
And the reparations guide recognizes that part of it, just this telling of the stories and owning up to the uncomfortable truths of slavery and its legacies is just talking about it can be a form of healing and reparations.
Can I add to that? Anne talked about how important it was to be able to name, to have a record, a printed record of these people who had been hidden for so long. And she's not the only author who it was so important to name. I think that that's a kind of in one way of trying to make things right, by at least having a written record, a published written record somewhere that's more easy to find than having to dig through these archives, right, that are so hard to access, so difficult to access. So I think that counts for a lot of people as well.
Catherine, do you want to jump in now?
Yeah, hi. I am so sorry. I couldn't get connected to my Wi-Fi, and I eventually just had to get off of everything. My boyfriend had disconnected his Zoom because of his work. So anyway, I guess for myself, I mean, I started to do the research. I found out of the blue in 2005 that my family had held people in bondage in the Missouri Ozarks. And it was a third great-grandfather. He'd held 9 men, women, and children. And I was lucky that my family they'd done a certain amount of genealogical work. And then I found, it was the Steele family. So I found something that sounds like a financial document, the Steele report that went out that talked about the Steele family. And so from there, I started to work with Tracy Wilson Kleekamp, who's in Missouri, who has helped the descendants of enslavers and the enslaved in finding family. And so I wanted to find out everything I could about the 9 men, women, and children my great-great-great-grandfather held. So I did about 5 years of genealogical work that, basically went back as far as I could into 3 states. And then I wrote up 2 articles that went into genealogical journal that's specific to the Ozarks. But then I made sure my polished notes all went into the Greene County archives, into their Black families of the Ozarks files. And there's my contacts information in there. So I feel like that's something, because so many people hit this wall when they get to 1870. And so that's like another way of doing the work.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep jumping in, I know, but I think the kind of work we're talking about too, it's about time, it's about resources, right? It's about having the money to travel and to do so that not everybody does. So, but I think anyway, by Catherine, by donating the research that she did, she makes it possible for people who don't have those same resources to access that information, so that they don't have to repeat the process again. And that counts. That's acknowledging, you're acknowledging your privilege, our privilege, and sharing, and making it possible for others who don't have that privilege.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the, as a historian, that's one of the things you really want to do, Catherine, is make sure everyone that material is saved somewhere that people can access it. There's been a side chat going on about the James Howe House on Claremont Avenue. And yes, indeed, it's still there. We don't know exactly when it was built. We believe that James Howe was enslaved by William Crane, who was one of the descendants of the early Cranes that settled in Newark. It I believe there's still a bit of uncertainty as to whether or not it was built as a place to house the enslaved workers, or it was built once he was freed. I believe he was manumitted when William passed away as part of the will. But what's interesting is that's one of the very visible reminders that there was slavery in Montclair. I've been doing a lot of research on another guy named Anthony Thompson, who was enslaved by a man named Sam Ward, who lived over in the South End by Rosedale Cemetery on Ward Place, or what became Ward Place. And, you know, he was there with his mother, and he was purchased when he was a young boy, probably 1 or 2 years old. And so there is slavery. There was a lot of slavery in Montclair, and we forget about it. And even that house doesn't serve as a reminder to us for some reason. I mean, it's just kind of there. So it's an interesting artifact for Montclair.
And also, I just wanted to add too that sometimes I think because New Jersey officially ended slavery so early in comparison, that people don't understand that that didn't mean that people didn't continue to enslave people just because it was outlawed. There were people held in New Jersey until the Civil War. So that's another part of the history that I think gets lost. And one other thing I wanted to say, just in reference to the previous question about reparations and gathering names as a form of that, one of our contributors, Sharon Morgan, also has created a kind of a database where people can deposit names that they might find of enslaved people. It's called Our Black Ancestry. And that's just one place that if you do find information of enslaved people and you don't know what to do with it, you could always go there and deposit it there. And she also has a lot of resources for other places and other ways to help you in your search and what to do with the information you find.
Helen, are you still on? If so, there's a question about a street name. It says, is Howe Avenue in Montclair named for James Howe? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't know where, sorry, I don't know where Howe Avenue is.
Okay, later.
Okay.
All right.
Add that to the list, things to look up.
Helen recently did an article in Montclair Neighbors on street names. You can find it on our blog as well now and on our website. But she didn't cover Howe, so there we go. Anybody have other thoughts or questions about it?
I see another question in the chat from Emily. Should I read that, Jane?
Yes, please do.
Sure, it says, Emily says, my ancestors are from the South, but the story has always been they were poor farmers with no slaves. However, genealogy shows that one ancestor was an overseer on a large plantation in Georgia. How do I go about finding out more, and any way to heal any long-term ills from that quote unquote job? Well, at first I just want to say that a lot of people think that because their ancestors were poor, that they did not hold people. And I think, you know, Catherine's actually, her essay kind of speaks to that because people could have, you know, you didn't have to have a huge plantation in order to enslave 1 or 2 people. So poverty didn't necessarily, or, you know, not being rich didn't necessarily mean that, didn't necessarily exempt people from enslaving other people. As far as finding out more information, I'm sorry, I'm just looking. I'm trying to go back to the question just to see, as far as, you know, finding more information, I always like to direct people to FamilySearch.org because it's free. And that's the Latter-day Saints organization's website, and there's a lot of information there. Without signing up for a place, you can just kind of see what information is to be found there. And as far as healing, there are so many coming to the table working groups all around the country. And I feel like that's a great place to start, just to be able to be in touch with other people who are also doing this very personal and very emotional work. So it's not something I think to enter into alone. It's nice to have community. And so I would definitely just check out Coming to the Table's site and see if there's a working group in your area that you could, connect with.
And that leads to another question, Dionne. Somebody asks whether or not there's a chapter of Coming to the Table in the Montclair area.
No, I'm the Montclair representative. That's just me.
So you can reach out to you then.
You have to wait for my book.
Oh, and somebody points out that if you have a Montclair library card, you can access the Ancestry database for free.
Oh.
So, and the other interesting thing about that is I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if he were an overseer, might he not have lived on the place and therefore would show up in census data?
So yeah, which is, I'm sorry, that was why I was.
Yes, that's actually how I found out. He was on the census.
And so were you able to find out with the census data, were you able to find out who owned the plantation?
Well, that was kind of hard because there was a long list of names, including, other overseers and other things. So I guess I probably could if I went further. I was just shocked at the overseer. But yeah. He was the overseer in 1850 and he was the overseer in 1860. So whatever he did, he was good at his job, which I don't know if it's good or bad. So.
As part of that, isn't it possible, I mean, I don't know how this figures into the history, but when certain people who were in bondage were given their freedom, isn't it possible that they also may have continued in the practice of also keeping slaves?
I'm not exactly sure. Can you say that again? I want to understand your question.
I'm thinking about that. Certain enlightened slave owners would then grant certain members of their household that had been forcibly brought from Africa, and then they were at some point they were granted property and they were freed at the volition of the slave owner. Or actually, there was trading that went on between slave owners sometimes because they were property. And all I'm saying is that for those that may have then found themselves as freed slaves, that they may have continued that practice with people who, as poor farmers, let's say, and they may have continued that practice. I mean, I don't know that there's any evidence to that, but I just can't imagine that, the agricultural practices that were overwhelmingly built on slavery just disappeared because a person of color who then became a property owner may have only provided a few acres for himself, but they also may have provided for other members of their community through bondage. Is that, I mean, am I off in thinking that?
I think that there is, we do know that there were some free blacks. I'm not going to say freed blacks, I'm saying free blacks, two very different things, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Free blacks who early on did enslave other people of color, and we don't talk about this enough, but Native Americans, American Indians, indigenous peoples, depends on what that's the other problem of naming, right? Like, how do we name, right? Indigenous peoples in the Americas were also enslaved. So, and I think early on were enslaved by some free blacks, but I don't think the practice lasted very long.
I can imagine. But I mean, the reason I bring this up is because about a year or two ago, I read a book about, I think they're referred to as rednecks. And in Barbados, there are about 400 Irish. And there were as many as 40,000 Irish who were enslaved by British landowners.
Yes.
And they were brought from Ireland and they were brought to Barbados to cut sugarcane. And they were not indentured servants. they were slaves. And of the 40,000, many of them died, as you can imagine, from poverty and disease. But to this day, there is a whole group of people, and they are incredibly, diseased and poor, and they're isolated from the rest of the society in Barbados, and they live in a part of Georgetown. And it's just a very, very, the idea that color was defining, obviously, the trade was based on the subjugation of Black people, but slavery has existed, from Egyptian times or before biblical times. But this episode that among the Irish, have always been, subjects of the British, that's a very, very sad chapter, even to this day.
I think we've got ourselves about 2 minutes left before our 8 o'clock bewitching hour here. And somebody put in the comments that I just wanted to share with everybody that says, as a white person, I found the workshops from White Awake are also helpful in terms of holding space for some of the healing work. And then they provided a link. I'm not familiar with that organization. Dionne or Jill, are you?
No. I would really like to take a minute to respond, because I feel, I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know, but about that organization, but it's always good to know about new ideas and new sources. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's what, at least in part, it's what Anne wrote about in her chapter about the racialization of slavery. Right? That's a distinct difference, and that happened here, where and so I'm not negating what happened to the Irish. For whatever it's worth, I've lived there. In other words, so but there was a very different thing happened here when it was institutionalized and made part of law.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? That is fundamentally different.
Oh yeah.
I'm not equating trauma. I am not equating the harms that were done, but I'm saying it was different.
Definitely, I agree.
And I will just say too that we talk about slavery in a communal way, but these are also individual people who all acted for their own personal reasons. And of course, you will find people who were enslaved who got their freedom and then bought other people, but they bought them to free them so that they could get family members back or whatever, a variety of reasons. So I think we also always have to consider that while there was a communal harm, there are also personal harms, and people were doing whatever they needed to do for their autonomy.
Well, I think
it was always resistance. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you. I think it was a great place to end it, because there was always resistance. People always resisted. People always found a way. Some people were able to find some humanity. Sorry, Jane.
No, what I was just going, I'm just wrapping things up here. And what I just wanted to say was how much I enjoyed the personal aspects of the book, the trials and tribulations that you contributors went through to confront this yourselves. And it's made me, I have a family tree, and I know that there must be enslavers back there, especially because I have early Dutch settlers. And I think that I just don't know names. And now I want to go back and start looking for names for all those people that I don't know about. So I want to thank you, both Jill and Dionne, but also all of the contributors for kind of whetting my appetite for that research now.
That's what happened to me too.
Yeah.
It's contagious.
Yeah, I'm afraid it might be. So thank you all for coming, and especially thank you to the contributors who popped on. That was a delightful surprise. And remember, you can get 30% off and a free ebook if you go to Rutgers University Press. So do that. And we have lots of thanks coming in the chat room. And we'll see you guys next week. There's one at noon and there's one at 7. Same program. Helen is going to be talking about Upper Montclair. So those of you in LA might not be as interested, but you're welcome to come in.
Jane, I was looking on the maps for Howe Avenue while we were talking. So it's not on the 1881 map, but it's on the 1906 map. That was all I could find out today. But Mike Farrelly, our township historian, is good for sleuthing those kinds of things. So we'll have to look into that a little bit more.
And we'll let you know if we know next week. All right. Thank you, everybody. It's been a joy. Thank you both for coming tonight. Glad we were able to get this extended family here tonight.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much for hosting us, and thank you everybody for coming.
Everybody.
Thank
Be well.
you.
Stay
Thank you
safe.
so much.